Three human students stood outside the administrative tower of Vexor Prime Universal Academy, their hearts pounding with nervous energy. Tyler Brooks checked his data pad one more time, making sure all their petition documents were in order. Beside him, Amy Chen adjusted her uniform collar while Lucas Green practiced what he would say to the commander. "We have to stay calm," Tyler said quietly. "This regulation has been around for almost 250 years. They won't change it just because we get emotional." Amy nodded. "Right. We present the facts. We've been Federation members for 80 years. No incidents. No problems. The regulation is outdated." Lucas took a deep breath. "Let's go." The interior of the administrative building was beautiful. Crystal walls reflected light in ways that created dancing patterns across the floors. Students of a dozen different species walked through the hallways, some with multiple arms, others floating in containment fields, a few that looked like walking plants. This diversity was exactly why the three humans had chosen this academy. They wanted to learn about the galaxy, not just read about it in books back on Earth. Commander Thelvas's office was on the 7th floor. His assistant, a small blue creature with large eyes, gestured for them to enter. The commander himself sat behind a curved desk that seemed to grow from the floor itself. He had 4 arms, as all Vexarians did, and his skin had a subtle pattern that shifted colors based on his mood. Right now it showed pale green, which their orientation had taught them meant curiosity. "Good morning," Thelvas said in perfect English. The translator implant in his neck glowed softly. "I have reviewed your petition. Please explain your reasoning." Tyler stepped forward. "Commander, we want to enroll in Advanced Galactic History with Professor Kelman. It's one of the best courses in the Academy, and it's essential for our Diplomatic Studies program." "I see no issue with that," Thelvas replied. "However, your petition requests waiving Regulation 7 Alpha. You understand this regulation has been in place for 247 years. "Yes, sir," Amy said. "And that's exactly our point. This regulation was created before humans even had faster-than-light travel. Before we were Federation members. Before anyone really knew us." Lucas added, "We believe it's discriminatory. Every other species can attend history courses freely. Only humans require a war counselor to be present. It makes us feel like we're considered dangerous or unstable." Thelvas leaned back in his chair, his secondary hands folding together in thought. "I understand your concern. However, regulations exist for reasons. Let me ask you something. Do you know why this regulation was created?" The three humans looked at each other. Tyler shook his head. "The files we found just say it was a precautionary measure based on cultural assessment. There's no detailed explanation." "Interesting," the commander said. He pulled up files on his display screen, reading quietly for a moment. "It seems the original reasoning was never fully documented. The committee that created it simply noted that human cultural data suggested special accommodations were necessary for historical education. But that was over 2 centuries ago," Amy insisted. "Humans have changed. We've been part of the Federation for 80 years now. We've served on joint missions, attended dozens of academies, worked in diplomatic corps. There's never been a single incident involving a human student and historical education." Thelvas nodded slowly. "You make valid points. I have the enrollment records here. 43 human students have taken history courses at various Federation academies over the past 80 years. In every case, a war counselor was present. In 0 cases did the counselor need to intervene." "Exactly," Lucas said, feeling hopeful. "The counselors just sit there. They never do anything. It's an empty regulation that only serves to make us feel othered." The commander's skin shifted to a thoughtful orange color. "Perhaps you are correct. Perhaps this regulation has outlived its purpose." He paused, looking at each of them carefully. "However, I cannot simply eliminate a regulation that has stood for so long without testing the hypothesis. I propose a compromise." Tyler felt his heart race. "What kind of compromise, sir?" "You 3 will attend Professor Kelman's Advanced Galactic History course. For the first session, you will attend without a war counselor present. I will observe the session remotely. If everything proceeds normally, we will consider the regulation outdated and work to have it removed for all human students across the Federation." Amy's eyes widened. "You're serious? You'll actually let us try?" "I am serious," Thelvas confirmed. "But I must be clear about the conditions. If anything unusual occurs, if there is any indication that the regulation serves a purpose, it will remain in place." "Agreed." The three humans nodded eagerly. "Agreed," they said in unison. "Good." The course begins tomorrow morning at the second bell. Professor Kelmon has been informed that you will be attending. I have not told him about our experiment. As far as he knows, this is simply an enrollment of 3 human students with the standard accommodations waived due to administrative review. Lucas grinned. Thank you, Commander. You won't regret this. As they left the office, the 3 humans could barely contain their excitement. They had done it. They had convinced a Federation commander to challenge a regulation that had stood for nearly 2.5 centuries. This is huge, Amy said as they walked through the crystal hallways. If this works, we could change policy for every human student in every Federation academy. Tyler was more cautious. We need to be perfect tomorrow. Absolutely perfect. No reactions, no arguments, nothing that could be seen as problematic. It's just a history class, Lucas said with a shrug. How hard can it be? We sit, we listen, we take notes. We've been doing that since we were kids. That evening, the 3 of them met in the student common area to prepare. They reviewed the course syllabus, which covered major conflicts and political movements across the past 1,000 years of galactic civilization. The first lecture would focus on the War of Territorial Adjustment between the Krell Empire and the VRNN Collective, which had occurred 800 years ago. This should be fascinating, Amy said, reading through the summary. 2 major powers fighting over resource-rich systems. It says here it was one of the bloodiest conflicts in recorded galactic history. Tyler nodded. Perfect topic for our first day. We show that we can handle discussions of warfare and conflict maturely. We prove that humans don't need special supervision. None of them noticed the small detail in the casualty reports. None of them thought to compare the numbers to anything from Earth's history. They went to sleep that night confident and excited, completely unaware of what tomorrow's lecture would reveal. The lecture hall was enormous, with curved seating that rose in tiers around a central presentation platform. Students of 15 different species filled the seats, their various forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity. Tyler, Amy, and Lucas found seats together in the middle section, their data pads ready for notes. Professor Kelmon entered precisely at the second bell. He was a crystalline, his body composed of transparent geometric structures that refracted light into soft rainbows. He had taught galactic history for 340 years, and his reputation for thoroughness was legendary. His voice, generated through vibrations in his crystal structure, filled the hall with a gentle resonance. Welcome to Advanced Galactic History, he began. Today we begin our study of conflicts that shaped our modern Federation. We will start with what many scholars consider the darkest chapter in our shared past, the Great Territorial War between the Krell Empire and the VRNN Collective. A holographic display activated above the platform, showing 2 vast empires separated by a neutral zone of 8 star systems. The systems glowed with indicators showing rich mineral deposits and habitable worlds. This war began 812 years ago, Professor Kelmon continued. The disputed territory contained resources both empires needed for expansion. Diplomatic solutions failed. What followed was a conflict that would change how our galaxy viewed warfare forever. Tyler took notes carefully. Around them, alien students leaned forward with serious expressions. A Vexarian student in the front row had her 4 hands clasped together. A floating Therilian dimmed his bioluminescence in what seemed like respect. The war lasted 40 years, the professor said, his crystal body flickering with each word. 40 years of ships destroyed, stations captured, worlds blockaded. It spread across all 8 systems of the disputed zone. By the time peace was finally achieved, the cost was almost unimaginable. The holographic display showed battle sites, each marked with glowing red dots. Some systems had dozens of dots. The visual was meant to convey the scope and horror of the conflict. The total casualty count, Professor Kelmon said softly, reached 2.3 million souls. Krell, VRNN, and civilians caught in the crossfire. 2.3 million individuals who would never return home. This is why we study this war. So we never forget the terrible price of failed diplomacy. The lecture hall was silent. Some students made notes. Others simply sat in respectful quiet, processing the magnitude of what they were hearing. Tyler stared at his data pad. He read the number again. 2.3 million. Over 40 years. Across 8 solar systems. He felt something strange in his chest, a tightness that made it hard to breathe normally. Beside him, Amy had stopped taking notes. She was doing math on her pad, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. Lucas had gone very still, his face unreadable. Professor Kelmon continued. The economic impact was devastating. Both empires spent nearly 30% of their total resources on the war effort. Agricultural production collapsed in border regions. An entire generation grew up knowing nothing but conflict. The psychological scars lasted for centuries. Tyler raised his hand slowly. He did not want to interrupt, but something felt wrong. Very wrong. The professor's crystal structure tilted toward him. Yes? You have a question? Professor, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I heard correctly. You said this war lasted 40 years. That is correct. 40 years, 2 months and 17 days to be precise. Tyler swallowed. And the casualty count was 2.3 million? Total? For both sides. Yes. 2.3 million confirmed deaths. Approximately 4.1 million wounded. These numbers are well documented in both Krell and VRWNN historical archives. Amy's hand was shaking slightly as she looked at her calculations. Lucas had closed his eyes. A Vexarian student turned to look at Tyler, sensing something in his tone. Is there a problem with these numbers? She asked. Tyler did not know how to answer. He looked at his friends. Amy gave him a tiny nod. Lucas opened his eyes and shrugged as if to say they had already come this far. I'm just trying to understand the scale, Tyler said carefully. So this is considered one of the bloodiest wars in galactic history. 40 years. 8 star systems. 2.3 million casualties. The bloodiest war in recorded history, Professor Kelman corrected. No conflict before or since has approached this level of devastation. It is why the war led directly to the formation of the Galactic Mediation Council. The galaxy looked at what had happened and said never again. Tyler did more math on his datapad. 2.3 million divided by 40 years. That was 57,500 deaths per year. Spread across 8 entire solar systems. With 2 major empires fully committed to total war. Professor, Amy said quietly, may I ask a question? Of course. When you say total war, what exactly does that mean? Were civilian populations targeted? Professor Kelman's structure flickered with what looked like distress. Absolutely not. The rules of engagement were strictly observed by both sides. Military targets only. Civilian stations and planets were clearly marked as neutral zones. Any commander who violated these rules was immediately removed from command and prosecuted. The 2.3 million casualties were almost entirely military personnel who had volunteered for service. Lucas made a sound in his throat, something between a cough and a gasp. Several students turned to look at the 3 humans now. Are you 3 unwell? Professor Kelman asked with concern. You look distressed. Tyler did not know what to say. How could he explain? How could he put into words what was going through his mind? Amy tried. Professor, I think there might be a cultural misunderstanding. When humans hear about a major war, we think of different scales. Different types of conflict. A Thrillian student, his body glowing with curiosity, asked, what do you mean different scales? This was 8 solar systems. 2 empires. 40 years. How much larger could warfare possibly be? Lucas laughed, but it was not a happy sound. It was bitter and sad. You have no idea, he whispered. Perhaps you should share with the class, Professor Kelman suggested gently. If humans have different historical context, it would be educational for all of us. Tyler looked at Amy and Lucas again. They had come here to prove humans could handle history classes. They had wanted to show they were not dangerous, not different, not in need of special counseling. But now, sitting in this room full of species who thought 2 million deaths over 40 years was unimaginable horror, Tyler realized why the regulation existed. We had a war, Tyler began slowly. On Earth. It was called World War II. The class waited, attentive. It lasted 6 years. Not 40. Just 6. Professor Kelman's crystal structure brightened with interest. And the casualties? Tyler's voice was barely above a whisper. 70 to 85 million people. The lecture hall erupted in shocked murmurs. The lecture hall had gone completely silent. Every student, every alien species, every floating and standing and seated being stared at the 3 humans. Professor Kelman's crystal structure had stopped flickering entirely, frozen in what could only be shock. I'm sorry, a Vexarian student said, her 4 hands pressed against her chest. Did you say 85 million? In 6 years? Tyler nodded slowly. His mouth felt dry. Yes. World War II lasted from 1939 to 1945. The estimates vary, but most historians agree between 70 and 85 million people died. That includes both military personnel and civilians. A floating Thrillian student's bioluminescence pulsed rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. But that's impossible. That would mean. He paused, clearly doing calculations in his head. That would mean over 14 million deaths every year. For 6 years straight. Yes, Amy said quietly. On one planet, Lucas added. Just Earth. Not 8 solar systems. One world. Professor Kelmon finally moved, his crystal body turning to face his display screen. He pulled up a calculator, entering numbers with visible trembling in his structures. The results appeared in holographic digits above the platform. 14,166,000 deaths per year, he read aloud. Compared to the Great Territorial War's 57,500 per year. His voice, usually so steady and gentle, now carried a weight of horror. That's 245 times more deadly. Per year. On a single planet. A student in the back row, an insect-like chither, stood up on her 6 legs. How is that possible? How did your species survive? That would be like losing entire planetary populations every few months. Tyler looked down at his hands. This was exactly what they had wanted to avoid. This was why the regulation existed. But now that they had started, they could not stop. The truth was out, and it demanded to be heard in full. Earth had about 2 billion people at the start of the war, he explained. Our planet is very densely populated compared to most worlds in the Federation. We could sustain those losses and keep fighting. Keep fighting, a Vexarian student repeated as if testing the words. You continued the war even with those casualties? Yes, Tyler said simply. Professor Kelmon's crystal structure began flickering again, rapidly, in patterns that suggested deep distress. Were the rules of engagement observed? Were civilians protected? The 3 humans exchanged looks. Amy took a breath and answered. No, Professor. Civilians were targeted. Cities were bombed. Entire populations were imprisoned or killed based on their ethnicity. There were death camps designed specifically to exterminate millions of people. We dropped 2 atomic bombs on cities full of civilians to end the war. The lecture hall exploded with noise. Students were standing, their voices raised in disbelief and horror. The chither student in the back made a clicking sound of distress. 2 Vexarians had wrapped their arms around each other in comfort. The Thrillian's light was flashing so rapidly it looked like a strobe. Order, Professor Kelmon called out, but his voice lacked its usual authority. Please order. The students gradually quieted, but the atmosphere in the room had completely changed. This was no longer an academic lecture. This had become something else entirely. A young Vexarian in the front row, his skin pale with shock, raised one hand slowly. How did your civilization recover from such horror? The psychological trauma alone would take centuries to heal. The Great Territorial War created support systems that are still active today, 800 years later. Lucas answered this time. We didn't really stop. World War II ended in 1945. But there were other wars. Many others. Many others? Professor Kelmon repeated weakly. Amy pulled up files on her data pad, her hand steady even though her voice was not. World War I from 1914 to 1918. 4 years. Approximately 40 million casualties. Before that, the Napoleonic Wars, the Mongol conquests, the Crusades, countless regional conflicts. After World War II we had the Korean War, the Vietnam War, multiple Middle Eastern conflicts, wars in Africa, South America, everywhere. Stop, the chither student said, her voice breaking. Please stop. But Amy continued because the truth needed to be complete. The Vietnam War lasted 20 years and killed over 3 million people. The Korean War killed over 3 million in just 3 years. These are just the major ones. There were hundreds of smaller wars happening constantly throughout our history. A Thrillian student's light went completely dark. I think I'm going to be sick, he said. Professor Kelmon moved toward his communication panel. I need to contact the administration. This is beyond my training. Wait, Tyler said, standing up. Please, Professor. We didn't mean to cause distress. We just wanted to provide context. You asked us to share. Context. The Vexarian student in front had tears streaming down her face. This isn't context. This is nightmare fuel. How are you 3 even functioning? How can you sit here calmly discussing these numbers? Lucas stood beside Tyler. Because it's our history. It's what we come from. Every human carries this knowledge. We learn about these wars in school when we're children. We visit memorials. We read the stories of survivors. It's part of who we are. And you still wanted to attend history class? The chither student asked. Knowing your own history is so much worse than anything we study? Amy stood as well, completing the trio. That's exactly why we wanted to attend. We wanted to learn about conflicts that weren't ours. Wars where 57,000 deaths over 40 years was considered catastrophic. We wanted to see what peace really looks like, what civilized warfare looks like. Professor Kelmon had reached his communication panel. He pressed several buttons, his crystal structure still flickering with distress. Commander Thelvas, this is Professor Kelmon. I need immediate assistance in Lecture Hall 7. We have a situation with the human students. No, they're not dangerous. They're just there. He paused. They're human. And I finally understand why the regulation exists. The students in the hall had begun talking among themselves, their voices a mixture of horror, disbelief and something else. Something that sounded like pity. A Vexarian student approached the three humans slowly. Is this why humans are known as such good soldiers? Why you're so effective in combat situations? Tyler shook his head. We're not good at combat because we're naturally violent. We're good at it because we had to be. We nearly destroyed ourselves learning how to fight. And then we nearly destroyed ourselves learning how to stop. The regulation, Lucas said suddenly, understanding dawning on his face. It's not to protect other students from us. No, Professor Kelmon agreed quietly. It's to protect all of you from accidentally traumatizing each other. Commander Thelvas arrived at Lecture Hall 7 within minutes of Professor Kelmon's emergency call. He had expected to find chaos, perhaps some kind of confrontation or breakdown. Instead, he found a room full of students sitting in stunned silence, with three human students standing together at the center like defendants awaiting judgment. Everyone remain calm, Thelvas announced as he entered. Professor Kelmon, please escort the other students to the common area. I need to speak with Tyler, Amy, and Lucas privately. The alien students filed out slowly, many of them casting backward glances at the humans. Some looked frightened. Others looked confused. A few looked at the humans with something that resembled sadness. When the hall was empty except for the commander and the three humans, Thelvas gestured for them to sit. He took a position at the professor's platform, his four arms crossed in a gesture that conveyed both authority and concern. Tell me exactly what happened, he said. Tyler explained the entire lecture, from the discussion of the Great Territorial War to their revelation about World War II. Amy added details about the other conflicts they had mentioned. Lucas remained quiet, his face showing the emotional weight of the conversation. Thelvas listened without interrupting. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled up his data pad and began searching through files. I am going to do something I should have done before I approved your petition, he said. I am going to actually read the complete human history files. Not the summary. Not the diplomatic overview we receive in Federation orientation. The actual detailed records. His fingers moved across the pad, opening file after file. The three humans watched as his skin shifted through colors. Pale green curiosity became yellow surprise, then orange concern, then a deep red they had never seen before. The 100 Years' War, Thelvas read aloud. 1337 to 1453. A conflict between two human kingdoms that lasted 116 years. Estimated casualties between 2.3 and 3.5 million. He looked up. Your single conflict had the same death count as our galaxy's worst war. And it lasted 3 times as long. Yes, sir, Tyler said quietly. Thelvas scrolled further. The Mongol conquest lasted from 1206 to 1368. Death toll estimated between 30 and 40 million people. 40 million. His voice cracked slightly. That's 17 times worse than the Great Territorial War. Over a century and a half of continuous expansion and warfare. Amy spoke carefully. Commander, you have to understand the context. These were different times. Humanity was not unified. We had hundreds of different nations, kingdoms, empires. We fought over resources, religion, territory, ideology. I am reading about your ideological wars now, Thelvas said, his skin deepening to an almost purple shade of distress. Wars fought over belief systems. Over economic theories. You had a conflict called the 30 Years' War that was primarily about religious differences. 8 million dead over which version of the same basic faith was correct. Lucas finally spoke. We're not proud of this history, Commander. It's why we wanted to move past it. Why we wanted to learn from species who found better ways. Thelvas opened another file. I am looking at your weapons technology. Chemical weapons that burned lungs. Biological weapons that spread disease. Nuclear weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds. You created tools specifically designed to maximize death. He paused, reading more. And you used them. On each other. On your own species. Yes, Tyler admitted. We did. The commander pulled up a comparison chart, placing human conflicts against galactic conflicts. The difference was staggering. Even minor human wars dwarfed what the galaxy considered catastrophic. The Great Territorial War was fought between professional militaries, Thelvas explained, his voice taking on a teaching tone. Both sides had armies composed of volunteers who had trained for years. They met in designated combat zones, usually in space between planets. Rules of engagement were strict. If a ship was disabled, the crew was rescued. Prisoners were treated well and exchanged regularly. Civilians were never targeted. Ever. He looked at the humans with something approaching disbelief. Your wars targeted civilians deliberately. You bombed cities to break morale. You starved populations to weaken economies. You committed genocide as military strategy. Yes, Amy said, tears forming in her eyes. We did all of those things. And we're horrified by it now. That's what we've been trying to tell you. Modern humans aren't like that. We learned. We grew. We joined the Federation because we wanted to be part of something better. Thelvas set down his data pad. I am reading about an event called the Siege of Leningrad. It lasted 872 days. Over 1 million people died, most of them civilians from starvation. Your own people starved an entire city for nearly 2.5 years. That was during World War II, Lucas said. One siege. One city. One of hundreds of similar events during that conflict. The commander's forearms moved in a gesture of overwhelming incomprehension. How did your species survive? The psychological damage alone should have destroyed your civilization. The trauma of living through such events, of knowing your neighbors, your leaders, your own people could commit such acts. Tyler thought about how to answer. We carry it with us. Every human knows this history. We teach it to our children so they understand what we're capable of if we're not careful. It's like a scar that never fully heals. We feel it every time someone mentions war casually, every time we hear casualty numbers, every time we discuss conflict. Thelvas sat down heavily, his skin cycling through colors rapidly. The regulation. I thought it was outdated prejudice. I thought it was discrimination from a time when the Federation did not understand humans. He laughed bitterly. But it was protection. For you and for other species. Protection from what? Amy asked. From exactly what happened today, Thelvas replied. From alien students casually discussing wars with 50,000 casualties over 40 years while sitting next to humans who know what real war looks like. From triggering the deep cultural trauma you carry. And from other species learning about your past and becoming terrified of you. Lucas leaned forward. Are they terrified of us now? Thelvas considered the question. Some probably are. Others are confused. Many are sad for you. They're trying to understand how a species with such a violent history could become the peaceful, cooperative Federation members you are today. We're trying to be better, Tyler said simply. That's all we can do. Learn from our mistakes. Work toward peace. Make sure it never happens again. The commander pulled up the regulation on his screen, reading it with new understanding. It requires a war counselor not to supervise humans, but to provide context. To help bridge the gap between your experiences and ours. To prevent exactly this kind of accidental trauma. So the experiment failed, Amy said sadly. No, Thelvas corrected. The experiment revealed the truth. And truth, however painful, is necessary for understanding. 1 week had passed since the incident in Lecture Hall 7. Commander Thelvas had called a special assembly in the main auditorium, and every student in the Advanced Galactic History course was required to attend. Tyler, Amy, and Lucas sat together in the middle section, aware of the stares and whispers from other students around them. The auditorium filled quickly. Vexarians, Thrillians, Chithers, and dozens of other species took their seats. The atmosphere was tense but curious. Everyone wanted to know what the commander would say about the regulation, about the humans, about what would happen next. Commander Thelvas walked onto the stage, his skin a calm blue that suggested controlled confidence. Beside him walked a human woman the 3 students did not recognize. She was older, perhaps in her 50s, with gray hair and kind eyes. She wore a simple uniform marked with Federation diplomatic insignia. Thank you all for coming, Thelvas began, his voice amplified throughout the auditorium. I have called this assembly to address what happened last week and to clarify the purpose of Regulation 7 Alpha, which requires human students to have a war counselor present during history courses. The audience leaned forward, listening intently. I owe an apology to Tyler Brooks, Amy Chen, and Lucas Green, the commander continued. When they petitioned to waive the regulation, I agreed because I believed it was outdated discrimination. I was wrong. The regulation is not discrimination. It is accommodation and protection for everyone involved. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Tyler felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment and something else he could not quite name. Thelvas gestured to the woman beside him. This is Dr. Nina Foster. She is a specialist in historical trauma and cross-cultural education. She has served as a war counselor at 4 different Federation academies over the past 20 years. Dr. Foster, please explain your role to the students. Dr. Foster stepped forward with a warm smile. Thank you, Commander. Hello, everyone. I know many of you have questions about what a war counselor actually does. I want to be very clear about something important. I am not here to censor information. I am not here to supervise humans as if they are dangerous. I am here to build bridges. She pulled up a holographic display showing 2 very different images. One showed the Great Territorial War with its organized fleets and designated combat zones. The other showed grainy footage from World War II with destroyed cities and desperate faces. These 2 images represent 2 completely different understandings of what warfare means, Dr. Foster explained. For most galactic species, war is a terrible last resort conducted with strict rules and honor codes. For humans, war was something else entirely. Something that nearly destroyed us multiple times throughout our history. A Vexarian student raised one of her 4 hands. Dr. Foster, are humans more violent than other species? No, Dr. Foster answered immediately and firmly. Humans are not more violent. We are survivors of violence. There is a crucial difference. Every species has the capacity for aggression and conflict. Humans simply had the unfortunate combination of high population density, competing ideologies, and weapons technology that advanced faster than our wisdom. She changed the holographic display to show human children learning in schools, human doctors helping alien patients, human engineers working on Federation projects. Modern humans are peaceful because we chose peace, Dr. Foster continued. We looked at our history and said never again. We built international laws, created human rights protections, and eventually reached out to join the Federation. But that history still lives in us. It shapes how we think, how we react, how we process information about conflict. Professor Kelmon, sitting in the front row, raised a crystal appendage. Can you explain what happened in my lecture? Why did the human students react so strongly to casualty numbers? Dr. Foster nodded. Of course. Imagine you grew up learning about events where millions died in single battles. Where entire cities were destroyed in hours. Where your own grandparents might have lived through horrors that would fill volumes. Then you sit in a classroom and hear 57,000 deaths over 40 years described as the worst imaginable catastrophe. She paused, letting that sink in. The disconnect is jarring. It's not that humans think those 57,000 lives matter less. It's that we know how much worse it can get. And knowing that, carrying that knowledge, is a form of trauma. Lucas stood up, surprising everyone. Dr. Foster, can I say something? Please do. Lucas looked around at the assembled students. Last week, when we explained World War II, I saw fear in some of your faces. I saw you looking at us like we were monsters. I want you to understand something. We're not proud of that history. We're ashamed of it. Every human child learns about the Holocaust, about Hiroshima, about the millions who died in wars we started ourselves. We learn it so we never forget what we're capable of if we lose our way. Amy stood beside him. The reason we wanted to waive the regulation was because we wanted to prove we've moved past that history. But Dr. Foster is right. We haven't moved past it. We've moved forward with it. It's still part of us. Tyler stood as well, completing the trio again. We don't need a counselor because we're dangerous. We need one because learning about conflict is different for us than it is for you. And having someone who can explain that difference helps everyone. A Chithar student stood on her 6 legs. I was afraid of you 3 after last week. I apologize for that fear. But now I think I understand better. You carry heavy knowledge, but you choose to use it for peace. Other students began standing, showing support in various species-specific ways. The Theridian who had gone dark last week glowed with soft, warm light. Vexarians pressed their hands over their hearts in a gesture of respect. Dr. Foster smiled at the response. This is exactly why the regulation exists. Not to separate humans, but to create understanding. When I attend history classes with human students, I can provide context when needed. I can help explain why certain topics affect humans differently. And I can help humans process what they're learning in a healthy way. Commander Thelvas stepped forward again. Regulation 7 Alpha will remain in place, but with a new official description. It is not a restriction. It is a support system for cross-cultural education. Dr. Foster will attend all history courses with Tyler, Amy, and Lucas. She will also be available to any student, human or otherwise, who wants to discuss what they learn. Professor Kelman stood from his seat. I would like to propose a modification to my course structure. Instead of only studying galactic conflicts, we should include comparative history. Human students can provide perspective on warfare, peace building, and societal recovery. We can all learn from each other. The professor's crystal structure flickered with renewed enthusiasm. Imagine studying not just the Great Territorial War but comparing it to human conflicts. Understanding why 57,000 deaths over 40 years represents successful conflict limitation. Learning how humans went from world wars to planetary peace. These lessons could benefit everyone. Dr. Foster nodded approvingly. That's an excellent approach, Professor. Comparative history helps everyone understand their own past better. When you see what humanity survived and overcame, perhaps you appreciate your own peaceful traditions more deeply. A Vexarian student raised her hand. Can we really learn from human history? Won't it just be depressing? Tyler answered this time. It's not just depressing. Yes, we did terrible things. But we also showed incredible resilience. We rebuilt cities that were destroyed. We created alliances with former enemies. We developed technologies for peace after using them for war. We proved that species can change, can grow, can become better than their worst moments. Amy added, every human alive today exists because our ancestors chose survival over surrender, chose hope over despair, chose peace over continued violence. That's a powerful lesson. Not that war is inevitable, but that peace is possible even after the worst conflicts imaginable. The assembly ended with a standing ovation, something rarely seen at academic gatherings. Students approached the three humans afterward, asking questions, offering friendship, expressing newfound respect. One young Vexarian, the same one who had cried during the original lecture, approached Tyler hesitantly. I wanted to apologize for my reaction last week. I was shocked and frightened. But now I see you differently. You're not scary. You're brave. Carrying that history and still choosing kindness takes real courage. Tyler smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Thank you. That means a lot. Dr. Foster gathered Tyler, Amy, and Lucas together before they left. You three did something important this week. You helped an entire academy understand humanity better. That's not easy work, but it's necessary work. Will it always be like this? Lucas asked. Will we always have to explain our past? For a while, yes, Dr. Foster admitted. Humanity is still relatively new to the Federation. But every time you explain, every time you help someone understand, you're building bridges. You're showing the galaxy that we're more than our history. We're what we chose to become despite that history. The next day, advanced galactic history resumed. This time, Dr. Foster sat in the back corner, a reassuring presence. Professor Kelman began the lesson with renewed purpose. Today we continue studying the Great Territorial War, but with a new approach. We will examine not just what happened, but why it happened, how it ended, and what we can learn by comparing it to similar conflicts from other cultures, including human history. Tyler, Amy, and Lucas took notes alongside their alien classmates. When difficult topics arose, Dr. Foster provided context. When comparisons to human history were relevant, the three humans shared their perspectives carefully and thoughtfully. The course transformed into something richer than anyone had expected. Students learned not just dates and battles, but deeper truths about conflict, peace, survival, and hope. And in that lecture hall, species that had never experienced true war learned from a species that had survived it. Together, they built understanding that would serve the Federation for